What's up, Wildside besties and baddies? I'm Bailey.
And I'm Chelsea, and we're here to walk you through the wild sides.
From homicides to hosticides and everything in between.
We're so glad you're here, so buckle up
and enjoy the ride.
I'm ready. Part two.
All right, so let's cap this off. So, as a refresher, the last thing that I remember was you got this JoAnn chick in custody saying all this stuff that doesn't line up. You got this other dude in custody. Was it Lobo?
Mm-hmm.
You got Lobo in custody. So basically, you got these two people that the sheriff's office think that they're responsible for the murder of Helen, but they're saying that they have nothing to do with it. And that's kind of where we're at. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah. We have Sheriff Deputy Bert Searcy, who came out of retirement, quit his life of pig farming to become a private investigator for Helen Wilson's case. His number one eyewitness, key witness, is 17-year-old Lisa Pudendorf.
Yeah.
Lisa's like, oh, yeah, yep. I saw them driving around in that
brown and green car, but then they're saying it's a blue car, and there's a whole thing with that.
Yeah. But more importantly, FBI profiler plus DNA evidence says we are looking for a single male, under the age of 30, blood type B, non-secretor, period, end of story. That's what we're looking for.
Yes.
Bruce Allen Smith he was their dude, but they get the blood results back, and he's not a non-secretor. The dude has to be a non-secretor. That has to happen. Right?
Close but no cigar.
And so, correct. They just did the arrest in North Carolina and Alabama. JoAnn was in North Carolina. Lobo was in Alabama. They bring them back to Beatrice, and Tom is being questioned, even though he's already detained for a previous crime that was unrelated. Now we are at March 17th, 1989.
So still 4 years, because the murder happened in 85.
4 years later. And really 4 years in like a month, like almost to the date. Okay. It's real close. The murder happened in February. We're in March, 4 years later. So we're back to Tom Winslow.
And who is Tom Winslow again?
Tom Winslow. Okay, I'm going to show you the chart again.
Right.
Joseph White, known as Lobo, and JoAnn, even though they weren't dating, they were friends. They were pals. They ran around together.
And
also ran. What was that?
She was saying that Joseph was with her in the apartment. That was part of her confession.
Right.
Lobo was with her.
And Tom and Beth were married at the time.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, Beth has been canceled out. She's been marked off because she had an alibi for that night. It was Tom's car that they keep saying that they were driving around in. Tom was like, yeah. Oh, yeah, but I just loaned my car to Cliff and Joseph. Now, Tom is friends with Cliff. Cliff is the guy that he goes to jail with for beating that hotel clerk until he was paralyzed. Cliff is married to Deb, or Debra Shelden, Cliff and Debra Shelden. And then they also have a buddy named James Dean. I'm going to leave it at that.
Okay. Yeah, I'm following.
Now, remember, Tom had talked to Sheriff Deputy, or we're gonna call him Deputy Searcy, quite a few times over this 4 years. When he was a private investigator, they talked to him. He said that he couldn't have been there. He was working, but then they found out, Deputy Searcy found out that was not true. Tom came clean. He said, yeah, I lied to you. Sorry. But then he's been back and forth. And the whole time, Deputy Searcy is like, you're not You're not a suspect. We just need information, right? They just keep telling you, we just need information for you, dude. Well, that's all about to change. So on March 17th, 1989, Tom Winslow was arrested for murder and taken to the Gage County Jail. During his detention, Winslow retracted his earlier statements claiming he had witnessed Helen Wilson's murder. And this is giving me the satanic cult.
Yeah, the Fall River cult murders.
The Fall River cult murders, where it is just telling all sorts of stuff. Never mind. I take it all back. I recant all this.
He said, she said, they think this person, it's
It's going to be exactly like that. So now Tom is saying that JoAnn Taylor and Joseph White, Lobo, had come to his apartment with blood on their clothes. Winslow also suggested that Beth Johnson might have been a witness to the crime, which was his wife at the time. So he's throwing his wife under the bus.
But she had an alibi.
But she had an alibi. When confronted about his inconsistent statements, Winslow responded, "This story is the true one, and if you don't want to believe it, that's fine. I'll go back to my cell. I feel better now because it's off my chest."
Okay.
He's getting defensive. Cersei is using very, I don't know if I want to call it unethical, but very strong tactics as far as his interrogations are concerned.
Questionable.
Okay? Very questionable. With no substantial leads, and the reason why we have no substantial leads, Bailey, is because of why. Nobody's blood type is matching.
It's matching, right.
We have three people
in custody, and none of their blood type matches.
None of their blood type matches. With no substantial leads, Sheriff DeWitt assigns Cersei and Deputy Lampkin to interrogate Cliff Shelden. And remember, Cliff Shelden is the guy that got in trouble with Tom Winslow. He beat that guy almost to death.
Yeah, and he's in jail.
Right. Despite knowing that Cliff has a reputation for lying. Like, the whole department knows that this dude's not very reliable, but desperate times call for desperate measures. Previously, Cliff had provided a Lincoln Police Department detective with two conflicting statements about Helen Wilson's murder, identifying Lobo, and then he identified not Tom Winslow, but Mark Goodson as the killers. Okay. So now we're throwing in another guy.
Yeah. This is crazy.
It's wild. On April 12th, Cersei began interviewing Cliff Shelden around 1:30, but the recording didn't start until approximately 5 p.m.
All right.
And I have to say, it's really bugging me, this whole, cameras being turned off, being turned back on.
I gotta say, and I might have said this in previous episodes, and I don't want to sound one way or the other, but if you would have asked me, even before we started this, if you would have asked me, 5 years ago, about, coerced confessions and, interview tactics, I would be like, well, that's what guilty criminals say, and that's what people threaten. And now, after all the cases we've covered and all the professionals we've interviewed, I'm just like, holy smokes, this stuff happens so much. And it's legitimately a thing. Or it has been. Maybe not as much anymore.
It has been. Sure. And I really believe that the more information that's out there, I hate to toot our own horns, but the fact that we cover cases that talk about these issues and highlight these issues as an informative platform,
it's scary.
The more you know. It's scary.
So scary. I used and I still respect a lot of the work, all of the work that law enforcement does.
Yeah.
But I have to say, if I was ever detained, literally the first thing I would ever do now, because before I'd be like, well, I don't need an attorney. I didn't do anything wrong. Literally the first thing I'm ever going to do if I'm ever detained for any reason I am evoking my, Fifth Amendment?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just going to be like, attorney now.
So
I'm not saying one word to you until I have an attorney. I don't care what you think about me of that. So this stuff it really bothers me. This stuff really
it
bothers me.
does.
Yeah.
So during this interrogation,
Mm-hmm. With the camera
Cliff
off
Sheldon
most of it.
but the parts that the camera is on, Cliff Sheldon claims that he had received a letter from JoAnn Taylor 3 to 4 months after the murder, in which she confessed to participating in the crime with Tom Winslow now. Now he's back on Tom and Lobo.
Uh-huh.
Cliff Sheldon also implicated his own wife, Debra, in the murder. I mean, we have people throwing people under the buses. I think he would have said that the Virgin Mary was there. You know, at this point, he's like, oh, yeah, and Jesus did it too.
Yeah.
I mean, they're throwing anybody they can think of under the bus. Cliff Sheldon also stated that Tom Winslow had told him about Helen's murder and that JoAnn Taylor, Lobo, Thomas Wilson, and Debra Shelden, his own wife, were present.
Okay.
Then stated that Lobo pushed Debra against a dresser with a mirror, causing her to hit her head, which broke the mirror and cut her.
Uh-huh.
But obviously, if you look through any of the photographs or the videos of the crime scene, there's no dresser. There's no mirror. There's nothing going on, right? Like
Right.
it is blatant. You could go back into that box, look through the stuff, and you would say, that's Cap.
That's Cap.
That's Cap.
Yep.
Searcy's report further suggested that Cliff Sheldon mentioned, now we're getting into James Dean as a possible participant, although a transcript of the interview did not include any reference to Dean. So when Searcy gives this report, even though it's not in the transcript, he was like, oh, and by the way, he told me that James Dean was there. Now, of course, when Lucas was listening to this, he was like, no, not Jimmy Dean. Not the sausage man.
What the sausage man, Jimmy Dean? Not. What's going to happen to our breakfast?
What's going to happen to our breakfast patties? And this is where I'm going to refer back to that HBO documentary. And it is, go watch it. It's so good. But they ask James Dean, his thoughts are on Cliff Sheldon. And that dude is like, I wouldn't trust him. I wouldn't touch him with a 10-foot pole. That guy is he is just a lion, sack of crap, and he's out for numero uno. It's all about Cliff. And you have to remember, Cliff is in jail for attempted murder, essentially. And it sounds to me like he probably can get a little bit lesser of a sentence if he gives them some pretty good information to solve this Helen Wilson murder.
Yeah.
Even at the cost of his own wife, right?
Dang, everybody's just lying. Lie, lie, lie.
Oh,
You lie
liar.
like this Persian rug on a rich man's floor.
It is everybody's pants are on fire.
You lie like a coon dog basking in the sunshine on my porch. Man,
So bad.
this
It's
is
so bad.
This is a Ban Perry song.
So the next day, April 13th, 1989, Searcy and another deputy conduct a second interview with Debra Shelden, Cliff's wife. Searcy interrogates Debra at the Lincoln Police Department headquarters. Similar to Cliff's interrogation, Searcy begins with questioning Debra around 3 or 4 p.m., but doesn't start recording until 7 p.m. He has her in a room for 3 to 4 hours before he turns that machine on.
Yeah, I don't like that at all.
They tell Debra that her husband, Cliff, is the one who gave them information that she was involved in this. And Bailey, you better be seated for this next part. During one of the interviews on that HBO documentary, Mind Over Murder, Debra recounts finding out that Cliff was the one who told the police that she was involved. And her response was, if Cliff said I was there, it must be true.
Interesting.
She literally, she thought to herself, like, and you as a therapist is where you're going to have to maybe step in on this thing. Like, is it low self-esteem? Like, how in the world could somebody know that they weren't there, but then say, well, if my husband said I was there, I must have been there. Why would he lie?
I mean, yeah. So a lot of times, and this is not a blanket statement, but a lot of times if you have individuals who have been, especially like psychologically and mentally manipulated and abused for so long, and you make them question their own sanity and their own reality, then it's pretty normal for them to say, well, I must have done that.
So is that gaslighting?
What gaslighting?
Her believing Cliff, even though she knew she wasn't there? Somebody
That
telling
can be
her,
a
like, yeah.
result of long-term gaslighting,
Okay.
right? Because what gaslighting does is it literally makes you question your intuition. It makes you question your own reality and your own sanity. And if it's done, you know, chronically, long-term, and significantly, then the result is somebody saying, yeah, if that, that must be true. And not everybody who's been chronically manipulated and gaslit is going to do that. But say, just again, hypothetical, if you have somebody that has like a dependent personality disorder, which is on top of that is, I can't really do things for myself. And I really psychologically, physically, financially, spiritually rely on other people or another person. I mean, that could be a combination enough to be like, absolutely, if that's what they said, then it must be true.
Sure. And I
When
want you to hold on to that little nugget with Debra Shelden, okay?
Okay.
Debra mentioned that her husband, Cliff Shelden, had received a letter from JoAnn in which Taylor admitted her involvement in the murder. One of the deputies' report noted that Debra claimed not to have read the letter herself, and it might have mentioned Joseph White. However, Searcy's report contradicts this, stating that Debra had read the letter and it explicitly said Taylor and Lobo committed the murder. I know this is all confusing, but essentially what I'm trying to get you to see is Debra is literally like getting to the point where she is saying, oh, yeah, there was a letter. I don't think I read it, but Cliff told me about it, and I don't know. There was never a letter. She
Yeah.
was never there. Like, all of these people, all of the players in this thing are starting to give more and more in sync information. And we're going to start seeing this thing that started out as just this wild, silly string thing. It is going to start actually taking on some uniformity here in a bit.
I mean, it really plays into the whole concept of like false memories, right? It's like all of a sudden these people are having these memories that, most psychotherapists, or in this case, law enforcement, would deem as recovered memories.
Yes.
And I'm having a really hard time believing that to be true.
So here we go. Here, enter stage right. Good old Dr. Deputy Wayne Price.
Oh, man.
The only reason Debra gave for not mentioning James Dean during her previous interrogations was that she had been, quote unquote, blocking it. Something a mental health professional like Dr. Price might have suggested to her. Years earlier, Price had counseled Debra while working as the clinical director at the Blue Valley Mental Health Facility in Beatrice.
Oh, man, he knows all these people, huh?
Mm-hmm. So this, I mean, can we say this is pretty much a mirror image of JoAnn Taylor?
Yeah.
Debra also had a baby girl, but due to the child abuse speculations at the hand of Debra's boyfriend at the time, it was recommended that Debra begin treatment with Dr. Price. Dr. Price recommended that she relinquish her rights to her daughter. Debra followed the advice of Dr. Price. Her parental rights were eventually revoked. Right? So now here we are, 1989 again. During their interrogations, Debra again is working with Dr. Price. During this time, Dr. Price repeatedly asked Debra who else was involved in Helen's murder. And as Lucas said at one point, he said, is our motto not innocent until proven guilty anymore?
Right.
Is this not a thing anymore? Why is this you're innocent? Let's see if we can prove that you're or you're guilty, you're guilty. Let's see if we can prove that you're innocent. But this is like you're guilty, and not only are you guilty, someone else is guilty. You need to give us a name.
Yeah, I mean, like the witch trials.
Here we go, Bailey. Are you ready? He would instruct Debra to return to her cell, relax, and then suggest she try and sleep to see if she could remember details during her dreams.
So he's essentially doing like hypnosis.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
As a result of these, go back, go to sleep, tell me your dreams, the next morning, April 14th, 1989, Debra remembers that James Dean must have been part of the group and provides Deputy Searcy with another recorded statement, this time naming James Dean as present the night of Helen's murder. Following the interview, Debra Shelden was arrested as an accomplice to murder.
Oh, man.
By April 4th, Debra Shelden would plead guilty to aiding and abetting second-degree murder. What was Debra's blood type?
Not
AB.
Yeah, I was going to say not B.
AB.
There's so many problems with this dual psychologist deputy, right? Like there's already a power dynamic at play with like being a therapist.
Mm-hmm.
But being a therapist while in a role of being a sheriff's deputy and instructing this person to remember something for the sake of their freedom, like that's just, no. Yeah. We can't do that. Can't do that.
Right. During the interrogations with Debra Shelden, once she said James Dean was part of this, now James Dean is going to be pulled into this mix.
Right.
During the third interview with Debra Shelden on April 14th, 1989, that's when Debra added James Dean as another person who was present at the Helen Wilson murder. Based solely on that statement that Debra gave, Searcy obtained a warrant for Dean's arrest. However, Searcy concealed Debra's inconsistent statement from April 13th, the day before, as well as the fact that her story contradicted the physical evidence from the crime scene and Lisa Podendorf's account. Lisa never said James was there, right? Like, so you have all of these things that would not point to James Dean, but because Debra had a dream
that was recovered in a therapy session.
Yep. They are now, and they have a warrant for James's arrest.
No. And this is why I just want to say this, and this is why, and you guys will hear this in the interview with Dr. Loftus, how she's public enemy number one in a lot of ways because of her research and her being like recovered memories are not real. And basically when she testifies as an expert witness, she's not testifying for or against the defendant. She's just a neutral party. She's an expert witness. And her thing is exactly that. You cannot, like, we cannot, as a society, as a legal, silo in the criminal field, like, you can't persecute somebody simply because they have a quote unquote recovered memory.
Sure.
Right? Like, we can't do that. We can't just be like, oh, this person had a quote unquote recovered memory in a psychotherapy session with some, sheriff psychologist that
Mhm.
implicates this other person. And now we have a warrant for his arrest. Like, we cannot have a society that's how our legal system works. And I'm a therapist saying that. Like, if
Right.
somebody was in a therapy session with me and they have a quote unquote recovered memory and it implicates, their spouse as a child abuser, you have to be very, 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 very careful with that stuff.
Yeah.
And we have to have, I mean, there's 1,000 steps you have to take. You can't just be like, well, we're going to, arrest this POS scumbag, because we don't even know if that's true. This
Mhm.
person could have, I've had memories. I've woken up from dreams with the most realistic dream that Zach's cheated on me and I'm angry at him all day.
Oh, I had
You know what I mean?
dreams. I had dreams for years when Lucas and I first got married that I smoked cigarettes. And I was so convinced that I smoked pink Camel. They were in a pink and black box.
Huh.
I would have it was to the point that I had to ask Lucas if there was any time that he could ever remember me smoking cigarettes. I knew what they felt like.
Yeah.
I would smoke them, and I drove this old car. I had one of those push cigarette lighters, and I, to this day, I can tell you what it feels like to smoke these cigarettes.
Yeah.
And I have never smoked a cigarette a day in my life.
That's wild. Yeah.
I mean, come on, guys.
Yeah. So I think this is crazy, but it's a brilliant example for a case that you picked to go along with Dr. Loftus's interview. And hopefully this really drives home like the research and why it's so important, the work that she does.
Yes. Next day, April 15th, James Dean was arrested for the murder of Helen Wilson. He denied any involvement and also noted that his blood type was O. He even knew his blood type. He
Yeah,
was
he was
like,
just like,
guys,
this isn't me.
it can't be me, dude.
This is wild.
Despite his request for a lawyer, the deputies continued to question him without one. On April 16th, Searcy, Sheriff DeWitt, and Deputy Smith interrogated Dean for over 2 hours, again ignoring his request for legal representation. Then on April 17th, Dean was informed that JoAnn Taylor, Debra Shelden, and now Kathy Gonzalez, who was a lady that lived in the apartment above Helen Wilson's, had implicated him in the crime. So they're telling him, we have 3 people who saw you there. And if you don't confess to this, it's going to be the electric chair for you, dude.
Oh, man. This is also a side note. If you guys haven't listened to the interview with Dr. Alceste, then you need to listen to it because it talks about false confessions and her research that she does with false confessions. Yeah.
Dean was arraigned on April 17th and assigned a defense lawyer. But Searcy and other officers, including Sheriff DeWitt, continued to speak with him outside his lawyer's presence multiple times. Dean later reported that he was threatened with the electric chair if he did not cooperate. Upon Dean's arrest, he was interrogated extensively over the next 22 days without any of these sessions being recorded or documented.
Nope, don't like that.
Throughout this period, Dean consistently asserted his innocence, never left that narrative. Despite this, Searcy and DeWitt repeatedly pressured him to confess, warning that he could face the electric chair if he didn't, quote, come clean.
And that's terrifying, right? Like, it's like, just imagine if you have nothing to do with it and some woman had a recovered memory and that was enough to get you arrested. And they're like, you're going to be electrocuted.
And not just a woman, 3 women. 3 women. They're
Yeah.
telling him that 3 people see him there.
All right.
So who's entering? Who's entering stage right, Bailey? Dr. Price. Here comes Dr. Price. During this time, Dr. Price was called to the jail on at least 4 occasions to address Dean's intense distress. You think? As he was overwhelmed by the fear of being wrongfully accused of a murder he did not commit. Dean again and again denied he was involved. He had even agreed to a polygraph test, as well as giving his hair and blood samples. They conducted the polygraph test, and the polygrapher reported deception.
Okay.
So Dr. Price, was brought in to, quote, counsel Dean during the investigations. After an extensive discussion with Dean and his attorney, Dr. Price concluded that it was likely Dean had been present in the apartment during the time of Helen Wilson's murder. He informed Dean that his polygraph examination indicated signs of, quote, unconscious recall, and suggested that Dean was repressing memories of the event. Price advised him to, here we go, relax, and explained that this could help him remember details of the murder through his what, Bailey? His dreams.
I cannot.
Just relax. Go to your cell. Try to go to sleep. Once your body's relaxed, you will probably have more recollection through your dreams.
Nope.
And I am starting to understand what Dr. Loftus was talking about with this 1980s memory war.
Yeah.
Because apparently, maybe not every mental health professional were using these tactics, but they were hot on the scene.
Yeah. I mean, and this just goes back to, and I don't want to completely run this, I don't want to derail this too much, but it just goes back to like things that we've talked about where you have things that you swear by that you remember and people are like,
Sure.
that never happened.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, no, this absolutely 1,000% happened. And like the people who were there were like, no, that you're not remembering that correctly. And
It
you
did
would
not.
swear everything on it. Right?
Oh, I would pass lie detector tests on
Right.
certain things
Yeah.
that I have looked back on photos and I am like, how in the world? And it just shows you that your brain truly is not like, it's not a machine. It's very intelligent,
Right.
but wires get crossed. Things get blurred in there sometimes. They get misfiled.
Yep.
Now, following these sessions with Dr. Price, what happens with James Dean? He began experiencing dreams about Helen's murder, which became more detailed after he watched a video of the crime scene.
Okay. All right. All righty.
In a recorded statement dated May 8th, 1989, Dean expressed his belief that he had been present during the murder, but couldn't recall specific details. When asked how these memories surfaced, Dean responded, quote, well, I feel that I remembered it in my sleep. I obviously had some kind of subconscious block or something.
Right. Mm-hmm.
In a recorded interview on May 10th, 1989, Searcy and Lambkin conducted an interview with James Dean. During the interview, Dean provided additional details about the night of the homicide, but his recollection remained incomplete. Dean mentioned that when the group arrived at Wilson's apartment building, he initially thought they might be visiting Kathy Gonzalez, who lived in the building and was Joseph White's girlfriend. Como say what? At one point, Searcy asked Dean to describe where everyone, Tom Winslow, JoAnn Taylor, Joseph White, known as Lobo, Deb Shelden, and himself sat in Winslow's car during the drive to Helen's apartment. Dean responded, I couldn't do that. And added, you guys show a diagram of it, so that would ruin it. Right? So he's kind of starting to say, I don't think I can do this. You guys have already showed me some stuff, and I don't think that would be an accurate, confession, if you.
Yeah, for sure.
Later in the interview, Dean explained that his information came from a dream, and he didn't remember being involved in the incident until he saw the quote-unquote psychiatrist.
Oh, man.
He would go on to give another account May 17th, May 24th, June 7th, June 23rd, and July 16th, meaning he wanted to get on record and give an account 5 more times. Every single time he gave an account, it shifted a little bit more.
Yeah.
Dr. Price's consultation reports noted that during the session, Dean, quote, began to understand the polygraph results indicated, at least on a subconscious level, an awareness of being present in the apartment despite his conscious beliefs that he wasn't there. The report also mentions that the group had a, quote, rather extended discussion with Dean, which led him to accept the scenario where it was likely he had been present in the apartment. What was James Dean's blood type?
Not B.
Type O.
This is starting to kind of piss me off. So is there
Nope, we're going.
Are we getting
Buckle up.
a change of pace here?
Nope, because we're only at 5, Bailey. This is not the Beatrice 5.
All right.
Here we go. May 24th, 1989. Deputy Circe and Lambkin interview our good, solid, tried and true Deb Shelden in the presence of her attorney. During this interview, Debra Shelden recalled seeing Kathy Gonzalez.
Yep.
At Helen Wilson's apartment during the homicide.
I'm sure she did.
She mentioned that Kathy Gonzalez's nose began bleeding quite a bit at one point, after which Kathy Gonzalez left the apartment and did not return. When asked, here we go, why she didn't mention Kathy Gonzalez's presence earlier, Debra Shelden explained, I didn't remember her at first, but I've been thinking about the case and everything, and I had a nightmare, and I remembered her.
Great.
The next day,
she's arrested.
May 25th, 1989, Circe, Lambkin, and DeWitt traveled to Denver, Colorado, and arrest Kathy Gonzalez. The same day, Deputy Smith filed a complaint accusing Gonzalez of aiding and abetting, procuring, or causing another to kill Helen Wilson in the perpetration of or attempt to perpetrate any sexual assault in the first degree, kidnapping, or burglary. Pretty much, we're just going to put as many words in this thing as we can to cover her in some way, shape, or form. Right?
Yeah. I feel like somebody needs to tell these detectives that you don't get extra points or commission for each person you arrest.
But you might get a donut party at the end of the year.
Maybe.
With an award, a little medal, the little plastic ones that have the gold foil over them, our softball or soccer medals.
Yeah.
They might have gotten those by 1989.
I guess so.
Definitely a donut party.
Yep. I can.
Kathy Gonzalez was then transported to Beatrice, where biogenetic samples were taken from her at the hospital before she was transferred to the Gage County Jail. On May 26, during an interview with Dr. Price in Beatrice, Kathy Gonzalez asked Price to hypnotize her to help her recall being present, but Price refused. Instead, Dr. Price informed Kathy Gonzalez that another witness charged with the crime had implicated her. When Gonzalez asked how she could refresh her memory, Price advised her to relax and suggested that her memories might return in dreams. Price told Kathy Gonzalez that they would continue talking periodically to, quote, see what came back. He explained, quote, the important thing is the odds suggest that you were there but have blocked it out. With two people independently identifying you, there's a good chance. If you can remember, it will help you. We don't want you held responsible for anything you didn't do. But I have no idea what Lobo, JoAnn, or Winslow might say about you. When Kathy Gonzalez mentioned that she didn't even know who Thomas Winslow was, Dr. Price replied, you apparently don't want to. He added, quote, if you had witnessed what happened, I might have blocked it out too. Kathy Gonzalez then asked if remembering could trigger anything, to which Dr. Price responded that it might bring her a sense of relief. He assured her, we'll work with you. We're not here to railroad you in any way, okay? Kathy Gonzalez noted that there must be significant evidence against her, even though she didn't believe she was in Helen Wilson's apartment.
Ugh, that is so scary.
I know. Price further told Kathy Gonzalez that if she had been there and not participating, it would be a very different situation than if she had been actively involved.
Well, sure.
When Dr. Price asked whether Lobo would implicate her if it meant saving her, Gonzalez responded, I mean, he might. Right? So he's kind of like, if we can get these people to say you were there but not actively there, you were just a bystander, you think that he would do that, and it would probably get you less time. And she's like, I mean, crap, I don't know.
Yeah.
Might. Crap.
Oh.
Dr. Price also informed Kathy Gonzalez that since she had been implicated by two others, there was a good chance she was blocking the memory.
Yep, here we go.
Price also informed Gonzalez that since she had been implicated by two others, there's a good chance she was blocking her memory.
I mean, this is like gaslighting in and of itself. This is just nuts.
When Kathy Gonzalez asked what would happen if she still couldn't remember, Price replied that it would be, quote, up to the court to decide. Kind of like, what is that saying that Lucas always says? A bird in the hand is better than two in the bush.
Yeah, something like that.
Right. So it's kind of like, that we can give you some help here, but if you can't remember, then you're just going to be left to the mercy of the court.
And this is why you shouldn't have legal overlapping with clinical stuff. That you can't say stuff like that. You can't do stuff like that. This is crazy.
Meanwhile, Kathy Gonzalez's blood test results were returned, showing that she had type B blood, the same type found at the crime scene, though it differed by one genetic marker.
She was a secretor.
Dr. Rena, and I'm pretty sure she didn't leave her semen at the crime scene either.
Yeah, there's that.
Dr. Rena Roy explained that while blood didn't match, if there are two people's blood mixed, she certainly can't be excluded. Despite this, Circe informed Gonzalez that the test results matched her blood.
Of course. Yeah, and I mean, if you're having someone tell you that DNA evidence matches, and you're already being told by this psychologist that you must be, like you won't get electrocuted as long as you can remember what really happened and, you know.
Well, and what's really scary to me, the scariest part of all of the things that Dr. Price said to these people was, I would have blocked it out too. It was so horrific. I can understand why you blocked it out. I would have blocked it out too.
Yes.
And that scares the crap out of me, because how many times are we in those situations where it's like, hey, I would be scared to confess too, buddy. You know, we know you did it. It's okay.
And what's crazy is like I can't even imagine saying that to a client.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like unless like the only time that I can imagine saying that is if they came to me and they were getting therapy, and they say that they already went through this whole ordeal, right? Like this is the aftermath, and they're just like, and I didn't remember certain aspects of the trauma for a long time. I'd be like, that's understandable. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? Like that's what trauma does, is it you forget important memories, or even just non-important memories whenever you go through something traumatic like a car accident.
Mm-hmm.
Our brains do X, Y, and Z to block it out. But to like sit there and be like, oh yeah, like this shit was so horrific, and what you did was so horrific that no wonder you have a repressed memory. Like that's so dangerous.
I know. I know. It I'm telling you, this thing is so wild to me. Like I have said from the beginning, every once in a while, I'm going to go to this, let's remember the facts. So we are now at the point, we've had so much going on. Again, let's take it back to
Right.
ground level and let's remember the facts of this case.
Right.
Helen Wilson was murdered and raped. The cause of death was suffocation.
Mm-hmm.
2 blood types were found at the scene: O, belonging to Helen, and type B, non-secretor, belonging to an unidentified male.
Right.
Helen's sister and brother-in-law found Helen's body, made the 911 call at 9:29 in the morning of February 6, 1985. Now, our new facts to the case are Joseph White, known as Lobo, type O. JoAnn Taylor, type O. Thomas Winslow, A positive. Debra Shelden, AB. James Dean, type O. Kathy Gonzalez, who is a biological female, type B secretor.
Right. I mean, this obviously should be enough to dismiss all of them at this point.
Debra Shelden was the first to plead guilty. Just let that sink in for just a second. Debra Shelden, on her own accord, pled guilty. She told the judge, I was there at the scene and I should be properly punished.
And that goes back to the interview again that we did with Dr. Fabiana Alceste, Chelsea, when you said, like, you could imagine yourself falsely confessing because you are a natural people pleaser and you like to take accountability. And like, that's where I think I kind of chimed in with hyper accountability is also kind of like a trauma response. Like sometimes some people take accountability when they shouldn't,
Correct.
right? Because it gives them a sense of like rightness or being in control, that illusion of control. And it's just really interesting that you have this person who was pulled in by this other person saying that she was there because this person suggested that she was, and now she had this dream and all of a sudden she has a memory of committing this heinous crime.
Yes. I was going to say something, but then I think I'm going to plug it in just a second. James Dean followed, claiming that dreams helped him remember more than 80% of the crime.
Okay.
A few months later, JoAnn Taylor also pled guilty. breaking down in tears as she described Helen Wilson's assault. She whispered to herself, "Come on, Jo, you can do it. You've got to," as she spoke. Despite being found sane and competent to stand trial, a psychologist noted that JoAnn Taylor, quote, reflexively feels guilty for everything.
Uh-huh. Right, which is literally what we were just talking about. Yeah.
Tom Winslow, even though he gave conflicting statement, ultimately concluded that he was not involved in the crime. He pleaded no contest, saying that he had no memory of Helen's murder. Kathy Gonzalez also pled no contest. Both Winslow and Gonzalez chose not to go to trial due to fear that they would receive the death penalty if they did.
This is crazy.
Joseph White was the only suspect who sought to prove his innocence. He requested DNA testing, but his motion was denied at his trial for the rape and murder of Helen Wilson.
I didn't even know that was a thing, that they could do that.
The only evidence they had against him was the confession of his co-defendants.
How do you deny DNA testing?
I am so glad that you asked that, Bailey, because we're about to talk about it. So JoAnn Taylor, Debra Shelden, and James Dean, they all went on to testify. Well, and Joseph White, right? They all took their chance and went up there and testified. In an article written by Rachel Aviv, she described the trial phase like this. I thought this was crazy interesting. Joseph White's, or Lobo's, attorney Tony Redman was puzzled to see that their accounts, meaning JoAnn Taylor, Debra Shelden, and James Dean, of Lobo's actions, which at once had been wildly different, had begun to cohere. Right? So they're all starting
Is
to
that a
kind
word?
of cohere.
Huh. Okay.
Yeah. And this is what Tony Redman said. There was a thread to their story, a consensus. It was like they had become weirdly bonded to an idea. They didn't have a firm commitment to anything in life. They drifted from here to there, and all of a sudden, here in something solid, they all believed in it.
Yeah.
By the end of the trial, Lobo's attorney, Tony Redman, he also assumed that White was guilty, that Lobo was guilty because of this now cohesive, coherent testimony that these three people were giving.
And this was in like, what, 89?
89.
This isn't like 1927.
No.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. This wasn't when people were drilling holes in the back of people's heads to let demons out.
Oh, God.
Like, there were Mac computers in people's homes.
Oh, wow. Like, we already went to the moon. Like,
Yeah.
we literally already went to the moon and came back.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. I just want to make
Yeah.
sure I'm getting my timeline correct.
Yes. On January 18th, 1990, right? So the trial takes a little bit of time. On January 18th, 1990, Lobo requests, again, DNA tests, confident that they would prove he wasn't in the Beatrice apartment.
Right.
At the time, DNA testing was still a novel tool in the courts. However, just 3 years earlier, it had secured the conviction of a Florida man for rape, marking the first such in the United States. And I say that meaning, yes, it was new, but they had utilized it 3 years prior to this case.
Right.
And were able to prove, you know, that this man was guilty of rape in a Florida case.
Yeah. So he requests the DNA to be tested.
Mm-hmm. However, Gage County Attorney Richard Smith believed he had irrefutable proof of Lobo's guilt, a jury's verdict. He knew that they would find him guilty, and that's what was needed. To Smith, the decision of 12 jurors who had carefully considered the evidence and delivered a just verdict was the cornerstone of the criminal justice system.
Right. It should be, unless the jury is given wrong or forged or coerced evidence.
That guilty verdict represented the culmination of countless hours of investigative work, volumes of reports, and numerous court hearings. It provided a sense of, and this, of course, all provided a sense of closure to Helen Wilson's family, which is what they so desperately wanted.
I mean, that's valid, but it's wrong. I mean, it's incorrect. You don't have the correct people.
Right. And then when asked about this whole idea of DNA testing, Smith argued that the FBI wouldn't use the new technology on evidence obtained before 1989. And he believed that any biological samples collected from Wilson's apartment in 1985 were likely too degraded to be used.
Well, he's an attorney, not a scientist. It doesn't matter if that's his opinion.
Yeah. Well, here's a great little side note about old Richard Smith. It would later be revealed that Smith had asked a lab if they could perform DNA testing on the samples that they had that were, that were 4 years old. And when the lab responded back to him, the response was absolutely. No issues. We can absolutely do that. However, he conveniently decided to not pursue that route, right?
This shit is so stupid.
Mm-hmm. District Judge William Rist ultimately denied White's request for DNA testing.
These people
based pretty much on the Gage County attorney, Richard Smith. Like, don't be a dick.
I know,
Get
Richard.
it? Get it?
Is there a Niner in there? Were you calling from a walkie-talkie? Shut up, Richard.
Here we go. You ready for the sentencing, Bailey?
Yeah, let's get it over with. Come on.
Judge William Rist would go on to sentence Kathy Gonzalez to 10 years in prison for aiding and abetting second-degree murder, the same sentence that had been given to James Dean and Debra Shelden a few months earlier. So all three of them, James Dean, Debra Shelden, Kathy Gonzalez, 10 years in jail.
All right.
Next up, we got 27-year-old JoAnn Taylor, who had pled guilty to second-degree murder and testified against White, which helped secure his conviction. In return, the prosecution agreed to recommend a 15-year sentence. However, the judge disregarded the recommendation because JoAnn Taylor admitted to placing a pillow over the 68-year-old victim's face. The judge concluded that she likely was responsible for the victim's death because, again, she died of suffocation, and he sentenced JoAnn Taylor to 40 years in prison. Was there a pillow, Bailey, at the crime scene?
Nope.
There was an Afghan. No one pillow.
Yep, we're just going to ignore that piece of evidence, aren't we, Judge?
Yeah. Finally, we have Tom Winslow. 24-year-old Tom Winslow, he maintained that he had no memory of being in the victim's apartment. Winslow received a 50-year sentence for aiding and abetting second-degree murder.
This is insane. This is terrifying.
Now, it is. It is. And I'm going to try to pull on some heartstrings, not intentionally. Absolutely. I take it back. I'm intentionally pulling on some heartstrings right here. Listen to this quote by Kathy Gonzalez. Kathy Gonzalez, who described herself as, quote, polished trailer trash, reflected. They managed to get a bunch of people that really didn't have important lives. We weren't very well educated. We weren't really conducting our lives in a Christian manner for the most part, and they just got rid of us.
That's so much like the West Memphis 3.
Isn't it? She said, none of us were innocent. We were all broken in one way, shape, or form. Kind of meaning like they had carried guilt for the life that they were living. And to me, that's so crazy where it's like, but these are two completely different things.
Right.
Right. Like just because you might have not been living the best life doesn't mean that you raped and murdered a 68-year-old woman.
Right. Exactly.
Okay. Are you ready for this third wave? We're going to take an upturn from here.
Yes.
Here we go. This is the falling action. While White, Winslow, and Taylor were in prison, this chick, Tina Vath, decides after being a dispatcher for the Beatrice Police that she would apply for a job as an active officer on the force. Then in 2003, Tina Vath became one of the criminal investigators for the force. But here's the kicker, Bailey. She and her husband were actually best good friends with the Searcies.
Oh.
And she had talked to them for years about this case. And she was always getting Bert Searcy to tell her about this case. Tell me about this case. Tell me about this case, right? And over the years, she started realizing that things just weren't adding up in her mind.
All right, Tina.
Good job. I know. Applaud. And she decided to take it upon herself to reopen this case and take on people that had never actually seen any of the evidence to start looking at it again. Thank goodness they had a new court attorney, Randy Renter, who finally beat out Richard Smith. So Richard had been in that position for years, and finally there was an overturn.
Bye, Richard. Bye, Felicia.
Bye, Felicia. During all of this, while this is all happening, Lobo is in prison and he starts getting jobs in prison, right? And he starts saving up money and he's sending this money back to his mom. And he keeps telling her, I'm saving up for an attorney. This is crap. This bull crap. Bull honk. And that he was going to eventually get it. He was like, come hell or high water, I'm getting an attorney. It took him 7 years, Bailey, to save up enough money for an attorney. During that 7 years, he talked to 2 other guys and they were like, yeah, we'll take your case on. But it just never really went anywhere. You know, they just didn't really do much for him. Finally, in 2005, he found this dude, Doug Stratton.
All right, Doug.
And Stratton was like a senior attorney at a law firm, right? And so Stratton initially said, no, sorry, I don't feel comfortable with this case. But something about this case, Stratton decided, I want to go down and I want to meet this Lobo dude. I want to talk to him face to face and see what I feel about this. And after meeting him face to face and listening to his story, he decided he would take this case on.
Okay. All right,
He was convinced. Yeah, he was convinced. He believed that Joseph White, and then he also believed that Thomas Winslow would benefit from the new technology of this whole DNA testing, right? Because it's 2005 at this point.
They've been sitting in jail for what, 16 years?
Yep.
Oh, this makes me so angry.
I know. Thomas Winslow, he gets paired up with attorney Jerry Sosi, and Sosi and Stratton join forces. They decide that this thing is so big, we need to join forces and have a united front on this thing. And what is the very first thing that these 2 dudes do? They obtain a court order to protect the DNA evidence in the Helen Wilson murder. Because, as Stratton would go on to say, you know, it's real funny how these things grow legs and walk off, isn't it? That was the first thing they did, is they got a court order to make sure that nobody tampered with this evidence.
Okay, I didn't know you could do that.
It gives me chills. It gives me chills.
Yeah.
In October 2005, both of the attorneys filed motions to have crime scene evidence tested. And like you said, 1985, 2005, my quick math says that this is 20 years later for this evidence and 17 years, or I guess what, 15 years later for Lobo sitting in jail.
Uh-huh.
And guess who was pissed?
Richard.
The whole lot of them.
All of them.
Seriously, Dr. Deputy Price, DeWitt, but most of all, ex-Gage County Attorney Richard Smith.
Well, yeah.
And they would do they pulled out any stops that they could find arguing against Lobo's motion.
And this stuff just blows my mind that people,
Yep.
I mean, rationally, I know it exists, but in this context, it just blows my mind that people's ego literally outweighs science, data, and, life sentences for 6 different people. I
know.
It's just crazy to me.
Richard Smith would go on to tell the judge that Joseph Winslow forfeited the right to challenge his conviction because he pled guilty. Like, no, this dude has no right to challenge this. He pled guilty. He knows what he did. This is crap. I'm sure it will come as little surprise that the district judge, what does he do? He denies the motion in 2006.
I hate everything about this.
Because we got a good old boy system, Bailey. Small town.
Yep. This is a lot like the Fall River cult murder.
I'm telling you.
Yeah.
So what do Stratton and Sosi do? They double down. And in 2007, they appealed to the Nebraska Supreme Court. And Nebraska Supreme Court said, yep, we'll take a look at it.
As you should.
As you should. So I need to do a quick shout out to this gentleman by the name of Joe Dugan. He did a 7-part series for the Lincoln Journal-Star. And y'all, this thing is gold. So if you are not someone who wants to watch a documentary, read this 7-part series. He did a phenomenal job. So I'm going to read you kind of a clip from one of his parts. In 2008, the Human DNA Identification Laboratory at the University of Nebraska Medical Center tested blood and semen samples recovered from the apartment. 2 cuttings from Helen Wilson's nightgown, 2 slides and a cutting from the carpet, a slide of fluid taken from inside the victim. They also tested blood from Joseph White and Tom Winslow along with Helen Wilson because they had samples of all of that. Lab analysis used a method that required only tiny samples to extract DNA. The age of the sample mattered little, but it needed to be free of cross-contamination. In other words, if the police who collected the evidence contaminated it with their own cells, the test wouldn't work. But the tests worked, and it excluded White and Winslow. It was not a match.
No surprise, right?
Yeah.
There's no surprise that this doesn't match these guys.
Right. On August 1st, Stratton and Sosi announced what they called the first DNA exoneration in Nebraska. So August 1st, 2007. With this new fact, Winslow and White's DNA didn't match, the team decided to test the remaining evidence. And not one piece of DNA matched any of the 6. Not a single piece.
Which is no surprise. Right? We're not
So
surprised at all by this.
So who did it, Bailey? Somebody had to have done it.
I mean, either they never caught him or they tested it and a name popped up, or they already knew who it was but didn't test him or something like that.
Remember Bruce Allen Smith?
Yep, 3 names. He did it.
He had been discounted and eliminated as a suspect after the serology reports came back as not a match. Well, come to find out, the Oklahoma City Police forensic chemist, Joyce Gilchrist. She had tested the sample back in 1985 and had made a mistake.
Oh, no.
Gilchrist, now listen to this crap. Gilchrist, who earned the nickname Black Magic due to her amazing ability to match DNA evidence that other couldn't, was
that's
fired
not
in
good.
2001.
Ooh.
Why was she fired, Bailey?
She's tampering.
For shoddy work, and someone finally caught wind of it. It would come to light that her quote-unquote evidence led in part to 23 people being sentenced to death.
Oh my goodness.
12 of whom had been executed.
No. Did she go to prison?
No. I don't think so.
How did
but
she
she
not
did
go to-
die just recently. I don't know. That's a whole nother case. You know what I mean? Like I had been spending all my energy on this thing.
And this, if you guys want to listen to Dr. Kukuka's interview talking about human bias in forensic evidence.
Yes.
Like,
Yes. Yeah.
Shit, this is such a black hole. This is terrifying.
Bruce Allen's sample specifically, this is so crazy. I love science so much and I get so giddy. They were able to use the root of a pubic hair from Bruce Allen Smith. It was tested, eureka, perfect match.
Wow.
Period, end of story. Matched the semen, matched the blood, matched the everything.
Wow.
All of it. It's Bruce Allen Smith. So they are giddy. They're just like, yes, finally we find this guy. They load up. They're going to go arrest them.
He's dead.
He died of AIDS in 1992.
Oh, and this makes me so sad for Helen's family, right? To go through a trial and think that this whole thing happened because it was spun up by people's egos, and then come to find out, right? Like they demonize the wrong people. Oh, well, I shouldn't say that. I can't speak for their family, but like these bad guys were made bad guys, and then they've got to go through this whole grieving and mourning process all over again. And then they come to find out that this person actually was the real perpetrator and killed, my mom and my grandma. And now we're not going to see him brought to justice.
Sure. In the end, the Beatrice Six's defense team filed a civil suit against Gage County, Nebraska.
Oh, they should.
But here is what is heartbreaking to me, Bailey.
No.
5 of the 6 of the Beatrice 6 were on board and determined to have their name cleared, all except one. Who do you think did not want to persecute them, did not want to file a suit? Debra Shelden.
Yeah.
Why did she not? Because she still believed 20 years later that she was at the scene of the crime and that she was guilty of that murder.
Wow.
She had been brainwashed to the point that she truly believed that she was involved.
Oh, that's so sad.
Do I also want to tell you that Deb and Cliff are still married?
Wow.
Yeah, they're still married.
Wow, okay.
The team ultimately won, and Gage County, Nebraska had to pay them a total of $28.1 million.
Yes, they should.
How big is Gage County? How big is Beatrice, Nebraska, Bailey? What's the population?
Like 12,000 people.
12,000 people. So do you know what they had to do in order to pay that back?
What?
Because they didn't have that type of money. They then had to raise all taxes on every single person living in that county. They had to raise sales tax. They had to raise property tax.
Wow.
They had to raise taxes on businesses. So every single person that was living in Beatrice, Nebraska was getting dinged and getting essentially punished for how,
no matter how you cut that cake, it's just not fair, right?
No. And of course, that's what everybody in this town is like, wait a second. This wasn't our fault.
Right.
And you're going to raise our taxes
Yeah.
on you guys' ego and your fluff up?
Yeah. Ooh.
And Bailey, that is the case of the murder of Helen Wilson, better known as the Beatrice Six.
It's wild, Chelsea. I
Are
have
you so
never
proud
heard
of
of.
me?
Yes.
Are you so proud of me for writing up a two-part episode?
Yes. This is like an Olympic gold medal for you. Um, I've never heard of this case. And this is, oh, it's so scary. This case covers what? Like all of these interviews that we've done with these people. It covers Dr. Kukuka's the human bias in forensic science. And he basically says forensic science isn't as sciencey as you think it is. And that's
Mhm,
that homegirl Gilchrist, right, with her shoddy
mhm,
DNA work and being paid off
mhm,
by, Gage County dudes, probably for
mhm.
blowjobs. And then you've got the Dr. Fabiana Alceste, who does the false confessions and coerced confessions, and how some people are more susceptible, including like lower IQ or mental health issues and socioeconomic status and all of that stuff.
Yes.
And then now we've got Dr. Loftus, right, with this false memory, and you ooh, oh my goodness, you can't prosecute people. And this is why this is going to make me very unpopular, okay? And this is why I really adore Dr. Loftus and I appreciate her work because I knew of her before I became a therapist,
Mhm.
just from my love of true crime and her influence in the true crime arena. We cannot prosecute people just off of a memory of what happened
Mhm.
because you can't just trust memories. And I know that that is going to infuriate a lot of people, especially for like sexual abuse survivors. But
Mhm.
you have to have more than that. And this is a perfect example of why we have to have more than that. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Well, and I think it gives such validity to people who say that their memory is so true, right? It is so true. I'm not saying that it's not true to you,
Right.
but unfortunately, it's not the truth. Deb Sheldon literally lived with this guilt for 20 years. You talk to JoAnn Taylor, and she says that she can vividly remember the feel of that pillow that she put over
Yeah.
Helen Wilson's face. And it never happened, but she can feel it. She said that she will sometimes feel certain fabrics and she will get a flash of holding a pillow over
Yeah.
Helen Wilson's face.
Yes. Yep.
But it never happened.
Right. And that is the, I think, the keystone, right, of Dr. Loftus's research and what her argument is.
Yeah.
Her research isn't to discredit victims. Her
Hmm.
research is to simply say there is no scientific proof that our memories are accurate. They are
Yeah.
very real to us, right?
Yes.
But I mean, if you think about it, like our brain's job is to lie to us. Like we are wired to be deceived by our brains. That's what keeps us alive, right?
Yeah.
That's what keeps us, you know, that's why we have fear.
Hmm.
And fear a lot of times is just constructs of the brain, and that's to keep us alive. And if you think of it like in the terms of substance abuse and addicts, drugs literally rewire the brain to make you believe that you will not survive without your drug.
Sure.
That's literally what it does to the brain is I will die or I will cease to exist or I won't flourish or I can't cope. I can't make it through this life without my drug of choice. Your brain tells you that and you believe that. And
Sure.
you have all these other people saying that's not true. You're going to be fine without your drug. But that's not what your brain tells you. So
Right.
what do you believe, right? And that's why, and again, we're going to upset a lot of people with this concept, and especially with Dr. Loftus's, research. But at the end of the day, and this is coming from a therapist, right? If I have a client who comes to me and says, I think my husband is, abusing our child. Now, for me, I have to report that, right?
Sure.
But that doesn't mean that the husband is automatically arrested. There has to be an investigation, right?
Absolutely.
There has to be an investigation. You can't just claim that this is what happened and he's put in cuffs and he's thrown into, a jail cell. You have to do a full investigation because you also have to find data and evidence, because it could very well be something that you are not remembering correctly.
No.
I know.
And again, that's a scary thought, to think that you can't even trust yourself, right?
Well, yeah, that's why I don't know. Anyway, we could probably go off on a whole thing about this, but I think that
I'm
this would
so excited, Bailey. I'm always the one that's on the soapbox, and you have to be like, oh gosh, she's rambling. She's rambling, everybody.
Listen, I think this was a perfect case. You did such a good job picking this case to tie into Dr. Loftus's interview, because I think it really highlights the importance of what she's done in this field. Whether you agree with her or not, it is necessary science.
And I will say it again, watch the documentary. Please watch the documentary. And I want to tell you guys the ending, but I'm not like the very, very, very end, because y'all, it is heartfelt and it is lovely and it is such a great little Chelsea ending. Please watch the documentary.
I'm going to watch it.
HBO, if you're out there, please support our podcast.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Well, great job. And, much love to the Wilson family, and also the families of the Beatrice 6.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Seriously.
Yes. And again, please watch the documentary, because you'll get some of these answers about the families and all of that stuff, and like current answers for all of this stuff. So I would highly recommend, if you want just a really, even though it's so sad, this whole thing is really sad, if you want a little bit of a, man, that just makes you feel good at the end, watch the documentary. And there are multiple books. There are, like I said, Joe Dugan did a great job with that 7-part series in the Lincoln Star Journal.
Yeah.
If you guys are intrigued, we will plug it all in there. And if you guys are intrigued, there's a lot out there.
Yeah.
But as we always say, thank you so much for staying with us. And I know that this one was especially hard as far as trying to keep all of the players in line. But thank you for hanging out with us and staying with us on this wild and crazy ride.
For sure. And make sure to tune in on Friday for the interview with Dr. Loftus. It'll blow your mind.
Yep. And as always, guys, we'll catch you on the wild side.
Bye, guys.
Later, Gators. Hey, Wildside Tribe, don't forget to follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Wildside Podcast.
Make sure to tune in on Wildside Wednesdays. New episodes will drop each Wednesday at 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time.
We would love to hear from you, so if you have a wild case recommendation, email us at wildsidepodcast@gmail.com. That's wildside with a C. Or share your thoughts in the comments below.
As always, if you haven't heard it today, you're loved, you're worthy, and you're valuable. And we'll catch you on
the flip side.